Hi everybody and welcome to a deck tech video with Surreal, who's here to showcase how to build and pilot Ruric Thar the GRUUL unbowed.
Thank you for having me, Mons. I appreciate it. That intro is far too pleasant for what I have to offer today.
You know, you're a GRUUL player. You have to enter the stage with ferocity and monstrosity here, right?
And that will lose you the game if you do that.
Interesting.
There's a lot of interesting things here, but we'll get to that, shan't we?
We will. So what is the history behind this deck? Because Ruric Thar has been around for some time, actually.
Yeah, it's deck's been around the block for some time now. Back when cEDH was really, finding its footing, ad nauseam, because the card is busted, was the far and away the best deck. And my predecessor, the fellow who had and originally made Ruric Thar, brought it onto the scene and put it on the map, was Two Hand Touch. So Two Hand Touch had put this deck on the map by getting second in a very prominent cEDH tournament back when ad naus, and Ruric Thar was effectively an incredibly strong counter in the command zone to ad naus decks. Then Flash Hulk happened, and Flash Hulk was bad. Flash Hulk was bad for a pair of colors that have little to no interaction with the stack, and then Flash got banned. And ad naus got good again.
But I think that's something really important to think about, because the reason Ruric Thar is somewhat cEDH viable is that he is attacking the common strategies that are running around. But if for some reason those strategies disappears, Ruric Thar won't be as good anymore.
Yeah, Ruric Thar is very much what you would call a meta deck. It is a counter to the best decks in the format, which are trying to leverage ad naus, a lot of free spells. I mean, creature combo has come a long way since the days of when Ruric Thar was originally introduced. As long as people want to play counter spells and interact with the stack and play cheap 0-mana artifacts, Ruric Thar is going to be a really solid option, especially when the best cards to draw your deck usually require you to pay life. And low life is usually my friend when I get to play this deck. If so, for anybody watching the video, take a look at the, there are going to be links in the description. At least one of those links will be to my primer, and then a variety of the other links will probably also be found within my primer. So I think everything that I mention is at some point linked in my primer, because I tried to be really comprehensive when I wrote it.
So this deck has lines. How does this deck win? Like, where's this? It's also finished by combo, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I mean, it's cEDH, so you're generally inclined to play a combo, but it's got a variety of lines. It's primary, I mean, the namesake line is going to come from Conspicuous Snoop, which is really just an extension of the original Kiki-Jiki conscripts. Kiki conscripts is, well known in modern and incredibly solid. And Conspicuous Snoop was just an avenue to shortcut to Kiki combo, in a sense. But because of Kiki-Jiki being one of your core pieces for a variety of your lines, you're able to create layers so that if the first line fails, that you have backup. And then if that line fails, you have another backup. And even if Kiki gets exiled, you have even more backups. And so it was all about redundancy and creating a situation where you had minimal dead cards. Because as a color pairing that has little to no easy card draw, except when you're attacking, then you are more inclined to not have dead cards that you can just filter away or just ignore because you have the card draw capacity.
So how does this goblin's line work? Sorry, it's hard to pronounce that thing.
Conspicuous Snoop, or as I lovingly and affectionately call that poor little goblin, Snoop Doggy Dog. The Snoop line is a form of a Goblin Recruiter pile. You cast Goblin Recruiter, and it is possible to do this all in the same turn. However, it requires you to draw a card. So once you play Goblin Recruiter, you're able to stack your deck in a particular order by searching up a variety of goblins. And the goblins that you want are going to be your Conspicuous Snoop, your Kiki-Jiki, your Mog Fanatic, and your Torch.
I got to correct him.
Torch Courier. And so the way you want to stack them in particular is that your Goblin Recruiter comes down. The pile goes as follows. It's Conspicuous Snoop, followed by Torch Courier, followed by Kiki-Jiki, followed by Mog Fanatic. And it's not even necessary that you put the Mog Fanatic in the first pile, assuming that the Goblin Recruiter lives. Because once you set that up, you give your Conspicuous Snoop haste by casting the Torch Courier off the top. And so with Kiki-Jiki on the top, it can make infinite copies of itself. The last copy, you could tap it to make a copy of the Goblin Recruiter, which does find the Mog Fanatic. And then all of your Conspicuous Snoops swap from being Kiki-Jikis to being Mog Fanatics. You sack them all, and you have lethal. Now, that is not the only way it wins. I don't actually win with the combo all that often. Many times, I just beat people to death.
I can see that with that 6/6 vigilance and reach.
Yeah, in cEDH, Ruric Thar is very often the largest thing on the board. I mean, Ruric Thar will lose to a 7/7, but there just aren't 7/7s in cEDH.
I guess that commander might be one of the more problematic ones because he could become a 7/7.
Yes, Kenrith can be a bit of a nuisance, but other players are generally more inclined to kill the Kenrith for you because Kenrith is dangerous. And
a 6/6 just isn't.
A 6/6 that you can block effectively is less of a worry, especially considering that most people look at Kenrith and say, well, that's a combo piece, or that's a draw engine, or any number of... It's a necessary cog in the machine. Ruric Thar is just a really big, thick, with 2 C's hate bear. And it's not that worrying for some reason. Now, I know up on screen right now, we have the Possibility Storm combo, which effectively means that if anybody wants to cast a non-creature spell, including yourself, you're taking 12, which is a hefty chunk of damage when people want to be casting ad nauseam. And then, if all else fails, punch them in the face. In classic GRUUL fashion, it's not going to be the fanciest way to win a game, but Richard Garfield intended people to punch each other in the face with creatures, and getting to do that in cEDH, where that is the least common option, feels really good sometimes.
But there's also the part where like people are usually using their life total as a resource, really consuming their life total quite fast, and just taking damage from this. I mean, the damage here and there is just gonna stack up together, I think.
Yeah, so link in the description below, but I go into a bit of the hard math and the more complicated theory, which touches on a lot of the very classic articles from Magic's history. People like Brian Kibler, Mark Flores, Patrick Chapin, very much MTG greats who effectively have theorized that there's it's called the theory of fire, the philosophy of fire.
This sounds so GRUUL.
The idea is that what I call virtual card advantage, and that's that I don't care how many cards I draw. I care about how many cards my opponent doesn't get cast. I mean, they're effectively working with a ticking time bomb because each spell that they cast is 6 less life that they don't have. If you do the math really quickly, 40, if you want to break it down in multiples of 6, 6 times 6 is 36, which means that an opponent can only cast 6 spells in a game of cEDH that are not creatures with Ruric Thar on the battlefield before they can no longer cast spells. If you're already paying, considering 15 life to ad nauseam, taking chip damage from a variety of creatures, paying life to your shocklands, your fetches, any number of different things, suddenly that number dwindles very, very quickly. And opponents can get caught into situations where suddenly they go, I don't have the life to pay. I can't tutor for this. I can't cast my combo piece. Which brings me to a point of many folks sit there and look at Ruric Thar and go, this deck isn't good. It's not playing blue. It's not playing black. Your 2 colors are notorious for being unable to interact with the stack. And many players will just ask, is this deck good? This deck's not good. It's bad. And I go, yes, it is bad, or at least my opponents think it's bad. And that's the very best part out of playing Ruric Thar. Because... And Mons, you've mentioned before, you are a CySA player. So you very much are familiar with the concept of the rogue deck. And the ideas that come from behind, the ideas that stem from playing a rogue deck and why that's important. And one of the best things that you can have at a Ruric Thar, playing Ruric Thar at the table, is for your opponents to underestimate you. Being the player that nobody pays attention to is fantastic.
I actually always say that the metagame of all forms of free-for-all multiplayer games is that you want one of your opponents to spend resources dealing with another one of your opponents, while you get to sit there left behind to progress whatever you want. And I think this is where Ruric Thar really want to be. Just sit there and observe a counterspell of war while he's just saying trigger on the stack, I'm guessing.
Yes, that's very common.
I think I understand what you said in the beginning of the video, that you don't want to be in the center stage. You want to be our... This is so un-GRUUL. What's wrong with you?
It's very un-GRUUL. In a lot of ways, it is in many ways the most GRUUL that you can get, but also the least GRUUL, because your play pattern is usually not very aggressive. It's not in your face. it's not loud. It's very much an understated playstyle that benefits from, sitting back and watching things unfold. We are a disruptive mid-range deck. We are not the stacks deck that we used to be back in its inception. And now we are looking to roll with the punches and analyze the game as it comes. And that means that the way you play the deck, way you play Thar, is very dependent on what your pod composition looks like.
So if you're sitting down with a Ruric Thar and your pod composition, your opponents are playing this, what is going through your not GRUUL mind, your blue GRUUL mind?
So, we're looking at Animar, Soul of Elements, Crom Timna, and Winota.
Poor, if that's a blue farm Winota Crom, let's cry inside.
This is a pod that I would hate to see.
Oh.
I would not want to see this pod necessarily. And that's because I'm looking at 3 creature decks. 4 if you include myself.
Yeah.
And Ruric Thar doesn't do anything against creatures. There's no damage.
Yeah.
Animar, number 1. Animar gets quite large just from playing the game. And so Animar suddenly, that's a 7/7. Well, that means that Ruric Thar is no longer going to effectively be able to attack the Animar player.
Yep.
Winota is also a creature-based list. You are not looking so hot against that one either. And only having a singular 6/6 to block, because the rest of your creatures are usually relatively small, you're not exactly thrilled about that. You don't want to trade off your mana dorks.
But I think how this pod is going to be playing out is that Winota is going to put some stacks cards into play. You're going to put your Ruric Thar into play, and then basically Blue Farm is going to sit there and try to card draw into Cyclonic Rift, which everyone here is going to try to counterspell. Animar is going to counterspell that. Winota is going to try to counterspell with the Red Blast and Pyroblast. You're going to try to counterspell that. So the Blue Farm is going up against 3 opponents that are on the same mindset. And just like you described, Animar and Winota could basically just sit there and steal the win.
Absolutely. My Discord has had many arguments, and I've shout out to Timmy T1000. Timmy and I fight a lot about this because Timmy says, let's cut Snoop. And I sit there and go, we can't cut Snoop. And it's actually for pods like this that I don't want to cut Snoop, because having the line for Conspicuous Snoop as a 4, maybe 5 total cost way to win the game on the spot, that's really nice, because it puts me in the running instead of having to push for the Kiki combo, which is going to require a couple more tutors, a few more points of interaction. Conspicuous Snoop can come down incredibly early. I've pulled that combo off easily on turn 2 and 3 sometimes. And sometimes you can just sneak a game away. It's matchups like these where I go, I'm glad that I have Conspicuous Snoop instead of offering a different, a variety of different other points of interaction.
How about this pod instead? A little bit of a more stormy feeling to it.
Oh, Lord. This is a pod that I can only dream of sometimes. I am thrilled. I am thrilled as a Ruric Thar player. I look at this and I go, great, 3 blue decks. I'm really happy with that. Now, this pod in particular, we're looking at Urza. Urza is probably going to stacks out people a little bit. We're fine with that. In particular, Ruric Thar has an excellent matchup against Urza lists, because if Urza wants to play the game of, let me lock down the board with various orbs, whether that's Winter Orb or Static Orb, Ruric Thar was originally a mass land destruction and stacks deck. We are designed and built to work through mana denial. So your mana dorks makes us really happy. And the fact that Ruric Thar has vigilance. You can't tap him down. And I'm just going to swing for the fences at that Urza player and hope that those constructs don't get large enough to block the Thar. That's really the only issue I'm worried about from the Urza. Now, Niv Mizzet. Well, Niv Mizzet can go cry. That's about all I have to say for that. It really doesn't matter. This is a Spellslinger pod, and Ruric Thar thrives in Spellslinger pods. Sure, there's no ad nauseam at the table, but everybody wants to be ramping with not mana dorks, which means fast mana rocks, potentially rituals. And I'm seeing at least 2 storm decks. That's really good. You want to see pods like this. Just land an early Ruric Thar and let the other players fight amongst themselves. Ruric Thar will win you the game on its own, as will Possibility Storm in this instance.
How about a mixed pod? Here we have a Kenriff, that could be anything. We have a medium, like mid-range, and we have a faster Oddnos decks.
Seeing that you've got at least 2 of the players that are likely to be on ad nauseum, they're going off faster than you. And that's okay, because they're going to be paying life in order to speed up their combo turns. Paying life is great because Ruric Thar punishes you and forces the opponents to make harder and harder, increasingly more difficult decisions. as the game progresses and their life dwindles. Now, the Thrasios Akiri list, that could be a little bit tricky to work with and is probably going to be in some ways both your best friend and also your enemy, because you have the ability to interact with their particular game plan the least. However, you and the Thrasios Akiri deck are also most inclined to try and slow the game down and prevent your opponents, the Kenrith and Timna Crumb player, from going off as fast as they would like to.
So how has this deck been performing for you? You've been playing it a little bit here and there, and what's your take on its capabilities, so to say, at the current state of this metagame?
I would say that in the current metagame, it's incredibly capable. It matches up well against the best deck in the format and the best strategy. And, I would expect it to win its fair share of games. Generally the average 1 in 4, the standard that anybody else has. Ruric Thar will pick up wins from the sheer fact that people underestimate the list. We sit there and go, this deck is not that good. It shouldn't win this many games. Please, opponents, respect Ruric Thar. Since it's been on the database, it's shown up in a couple of tournaments, it's done relatively well in those tournaments, and people are starting to give it its due credit, which means that I'm not picking up the easy wins that I was back when I was really starting to push for the deck as a legitimate contender in the ad nauseam meta. But it still does incredibly fine. With each new set, there are new and different ways that Ruric Thar is learning to innovate. Ruric Thar on the primer list is designed for what my experiences are. They aren't what your pods and your metagame and your playgroup are going to be. Figuring out what you need to tech in is really, really key to piloting Ruric Thar. Right now, Blood Moon and Magus of the Moon and various moon-style effects are not in my list on the primer or in my personal list. That does not mean that Moon is bad in your meta.
Now, if you want to take a look at exactly how Surreal has been putting his deck together, and if you want to read the details of his primer, there's going to be a link in the description below of the video. That's it for us, everybody. Thank you, Surreal, for coming here and sharing your Hulk smashing experience.
Or not smashing.
Or not smashing.
Sometimes Ruric Thar, no smashing.
No smashing.
Ruric Thar lives a celibate life, no smashing.
Take care, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you like what I do and you wanna support me, feel free to share my videos or even checking out my Patreon page. Also, purchasing cards from the TCG Players website using the affiliate link in the description below of the video will also help the channel grow. So a big thank you to all of you.